Mr. Thompson here. We're looking at Standard 6 for U.S. history, analyze the challenges faced by the first five presidents and how they responded. More specifically, we're looking at Part C of that standard, explore Jefferson's expansion of presidential power, including the purchase and exploration of the Louisiana Territory. Thomas Jefferson led the Democratic Republican Party and was a strong critic against the Federalists' push for a stronger federal government. Once Jefferson was elected during the contentious election of 1800, Jefferson was now responsible for defending, for leading America into a more prosperous nation. However, even though his political philosophy leaned toward a more decentralized federal government, he ended up expanding the power of the president during his two terms. Jefferson was the first president to take the oath of office in the new national capital, Washington, D.C. He wanted to set a more simplistic tone for his inauguration, kept things pretty informal. However, he did want to address the need for the nation to heal under these divided political parties. For example, a famous line he said was, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." During Jefferson's two terms as president, he dealt with many domestic, so at home issues, as well as foreign policy issues. An area of conflict between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans was how to interpret the Constitution. For example, Jefferson, as a Democratic Republican, viewed the Constitution as strict construction, meaning that the powers granted to the federal government are only those that are explicitly listed in the Constitution. Therefore, this narrow interpretation of the Constitution means that any powers not granted and listed and laid out specifically to the federal government are now reserved for the states. In contrast, the Federalists supported a loose construction view of the Constitution, meaning that there are implied powers granted to the federal government using the Article 1 of the Constitution, the Elastic Clause, saying that Congress can grant anything that is necessary and proper. Using the terminology of necessary and proper, Federalists argue that it's worded vaguely that way so that any unforeseen circumstances that arise, the federal government has those implied powers to then carry out what is necessary and proper for the law. The Democratic Republicans opposed this interpretation as unrestricted power by the federal government. Even though Jefferson supported and leaned ideologically with a strict construction viewpoint, as president, he actually practiced sometimes a more loose construction. The purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France is an example of Thomas Jefferson expanding presidential power through loose construction, even though he claimed to be a strict constructionist. Louisiana was originally a part of France. When Jefferson was elected, Louisiana was ruled by Spain, but in 1800, Napoleon, a French general, acquired it back from Spain. American merchants and farmers lived in the Louisiana Territory, and New Orleans was a very important port. It was a key port for trade, American goods as an outlet moving through, particularly from the Ohio River Valley. So Jefferson sent Robert Livingston and James Monroe to France to check out and see how much New Orleans would cost for the U.S. to buy, because Jefferson wanted a permanent port on the Mississippi River. Napoleon saw this as an opportunity to finance his wars in Europe and also to stop further British expansion in North America. So he was actually willing to sell the entire Louisiana territory to the U.S. for $15 million. This ended up being a great deal for America because Livingston and Monroe were prepared to pay $10 million just for the New Orleans port. So they ended up getting New Orleans and the entire Louisiana territory thrown in. This purchase more than doubled the size of the United States. It gave the U.S. lands for future expansion and a very critical port, which allowed the United States to now trade, so export American goods around the world. This deal was known as the Louisiana Purchase, which, remember, doubled the size of the United States. Nowhere in the Constitution is it laid out that the president has the power to purchase land from another country. So Jefferson enters the presidency as a strict constructionist, but it doesn't actually lay out in the Constitution, hey, the president can purchase land. Therefore, the Louisiana Purchase is an example of Jefferson expanding the power of the president, because there actually isn't a provision in the Constitution saying the president can purchase land from another country. With the Louisiana Purchase, the United States acquired roughly 875,000 square miles, which is a lot. So now Jefferson's like, I want to gather information about this territory. I want to figure out what kind of opportunities are in this territory. He thought it was important because more and more settlers were moving west. They were moving to that Northwest territory. He believed that this Mississippi Valley territory would present itself as opportunities for more and more settlers. He feared, though, that as more and more people moved west, if there was trouble communicating with the East, the West would say, hey, we're going to leave the Union. And Jefferson wanted to avoid that. He wanted to keep the Union intact. No one was exactly sure what lay between St. Louis and the Pacific Ocean. So Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark on this government-funded expedition to explore this territory. It took them 16 months. They charted trails, mapped rivers, mountains, researched plants, animals, made contact with different Native American tribes. Geography-based stuff west of the Mississippi River. Most significantly, Lewis and Clark reached the Pacific Ocean and they laid a legal claim to the Oregon Territory. Now this claim opened up further westward expansion for the United States. The Lewis and Clark expedition and the legal claim to the Oregon Territory are other examples of Jefferson expanding presidential power not listed in the Constitution, so highlighting more use of loose construction of the Constitution as opposed to coming in with the strict constructionist view of the Constitution. Jefferson also faced some international pressures as France and Great Britain were once again at war. American ships and sailors were being harassed by both nations as America was trying to boost trade with Europe. Impressment of U.S. merchant sailors was an issue that laid heavily on Jefferson. The implementation of an embargo was his attempt to put economic pressure on the British to get them to stop interfering with U.S. ships and sailors.